Well, two of the things that I wanted to do a lot more of during the course of these lockdowns would be first, to read more books, and then secondly, to maybe write a book myself, two of which I have not done, mainly because I don't know where to start. So today I draw inspiration from this conversation with Dr. Dennis Khoo, who is the managing partner of All Digital Future. He has written a book based on his experience at building ASEAN's first digital bank, Tomorrow by UOB. He, in my opinion, ushered in the series of digital banks and challenger banks right across the region. But hopefully, he will inspire me to also maybe write a book myself, finally. Dr. Dennis Khoo, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure. First things that we have to address, how exactly should one build a digital bank?
It's a great question to start off with. And in my book, what I basically reiterate over and over again, there are three very important components. And it might surprise most people what those three components are. Number one, it's about the design. You need to put in consideration for efficiency, right? Because you want very low costs. You need to put in considerations for high ability to excite people with the sheer elegance of the experience. And so those are two of many, many considerations that you need to put in the design. Now, any company that wants to be an experience need to be masters in process, because process is what enables experience. And therefore, the second thing you need to look out for is really your ability to engineer, refine, improve, and constantly look at how your process can be better. And finally, of course, is technology, right? You need technology to make the process work beautifully day in, day out, and do it in a flawless way. So these are the three essential components that you need to build a digital bank. And unfortunately, at times, I think we have overemphasized technology of the other two.
Before we go to the more essential components, obviously, on business and getting it right, let's address technology, because some of the IDC frameworks on core banking would have been talked about in your book. I think that would be in chapters 3, if I'm not mistaken. You talk about the evolution of core banking as well. How has that taken place alongside this massive revolution of demand coming from customers for this digital banking experience?
That's another great question, Michael. And I think that let me begin with the origins of this, right? Because I think it's important to link this back to a business standpoint. And that business standpoint really has to do with the operating cost per customer. And one of the biggest enablers of operating cost per customer in a bank is really people and technology. And obviously, the better your technology is, the less people you have, especially in a digital bank. So in that context, right, the problem with most banks, of course, is that behind the bank is a spaghetti of solutions, right? There has really never been a single solution in banking, right? Like an SAP for banking. There's never been such a case. So you may find 50 different systems, and they all have to be integrated together. And if we go now to the question you asked, right, basically the previous core banking solutions, as you know, those that are not the fourth generation as labeled by IDC solutions, they tend to be monolithic, meaning that there isn't really a separation of the client code, the country code, and the global code. And what that means, changes that you make, basically, they're all intertwined. So every change you make, you have to basically test everything. And one of the things about banking is that as it got more competitive, there were more products. There was basically micro-segmentation, right, to create products that fit certain customers, to compete better. And what's happened is the products has made the core banking system very complicated, right? Especially when you have a lot of conditions and those conditions are coded in the core banking system. And then over time, it became more and more complicated, and testing became more and more difficult. And I think this will come to a head in the sense that, yes, you can build a digital bank using existing capabilities, technologies, legacy systems. You can build that, but you can't resolve the cost problem. And eventually, as my book explains, right, you have to see competition on two axes. One is about the customer experience. As a proxy for that, how high is your net promoter score? And my recommendation is that you need to be twice the average of the market in order to make a dent. The other, of course, is that, how cost effective can you be? You see banks now in markets that are really going for the bottom of the pyramid. The operating cost is $1, per operating cost. And if you're a legacy bank, you can't achieve that. You can't achieve that using your current core banking solution. And therefore, you need to think of a way that you're going to create an alternative to your existing solution. And because it's too risky to move everything at one go, you're likely to have to start it up, set it up by first moving smaller segments, right? You will have to rationalize the products because, as I mentioned, right, one of the complexities of the old core banking systems is really the product set. And if you move the entire product set over, no matter what you have, you end up with something that's very complicated. And the complication, of course, is inversely you're going to experience. So this is the big challenge ahead that I think almost every single bank will need to think about. Okay, if I need to compete against the digital entrants, and those digital entrants have much higher experience, right? And those digital entrants have much lower costs. What am I going to do from an experience standpoint, and what am I going to do from a cost standpoint? And definitely, if we now put the lens on the cost standpoint, technology and people are the big cost drivers there. And therefore, how do I think about the cloud? How do I think about process re-engineering? How do I think of stripping down the product set so that I can have a core system that is lean, right, and much simpler than it is today?
When you talk about the $1 benchmark, is that applicable across all markets, across different segments of the banking spectrum, or is that one specific segment, particularly retail?
I would say that that tends to be more mass banking, consumer banking, or SME banking. That means it's a large portfolio. And those numbers are probably world-beating numbers. So the best are at $1, and they are starting from the bottom of the pyramid. And of course, they're connected, right? You can't address the bottom of the pyramid if you don't have the cost structure, right? Sure. So they're connected. But I think one of the interesting things that my book talks about is drawing the parallels between that, right? Banking the bottom of the pyramid. And this has happened in China. There are many examples from China. There are examples from Brazil. There will be examples in Indonesia where there are, a large segment of the population is still unbanked or underbanked, right?
And one of the massive trends that we are tracking is this emergence of digital banks all over. In fact, at IDC, we've been talking about a number of 100 new challenger banks, new digital banks emerging by 2025. But the reality is there's more legacy incumbent banks that exist in this very active market. How do they cooperate and collaborate, and who will win?
Well, first, the senior management, the board, needs to understand more about the future of banking. And that's explained in chapter 2, right? What is the future of banking? And once you understand the forces at play, then what are the basics you need to get right? So, for example, again, going back, and making the analogy very simple, right? If it's really about how good the experience is, right, there's a whole bunch of initiatives that are needed to look at your experience currently and relative to the competition. And so a very simple way to look at it is if the digital bank is launched at double the NPS, and this isn't a theoretical thing because this is what happened in Korea with Kakao. Kakao Bank has an NPS score much higher than any of the incumbents in Korea. The worst thing about that is that there's no incumbent to compete with it from an experience standpoint. And that creates, therefore, the anti to play, right? Because they've got much better experience. So when people try it out, they say, yeah, this is how banking should always have been. And then if they're able to then provide great service and be proactive with data to anticipate your needs, then yeah, they're going to have a beachhead, right? And therefore, this is something that the management need to think very seriously about. The other angle, of course, is especially the opportunity in the countries I mentioned, right? They have big underbanked, unbanked, is do you want to serve the bottom? This is very clearly explained in the second chapter, and it also leverages on disruptive innovation. And what disruptive innovation shows us is that time and time again in many, many industries, any attacker that enters from the bottom of the pyramid, right, and they have a strong technological core, they will eventually move up market. And when they move up market, they will attack the incumbents' sweet spot. And the problem is that when they first start, the incumbents will say, well, let's give them that segment because we don't make money from that, right? So let's seed their market to them. But as they go in and they have scale, then they become very, very dangerous. And in fact, the disruption innovation theory almost always showcases that the incumbents cannot win this battle. And that's what I think the top management and the board need to be very clear about. And once you're very clear about that, then you know that it's a cost play, it's an experience play. And then the banks really need to improve the focus on process. And I'll end with this, right? Before your next question, there are really 6 P's that banks compete on in the past. There's the place, that's gone. There's the people, that's gone in digital, right? There's product, that's commoditized. And trying to differentiate too much on product creates this core banking problem that we just discussed. Then there's price and promotion. With interest rates the way they are, with the kind of competition that's driven down margins, can you really afford to give more benefit? So the only P left is process, right? And my thesis is basically that banks have not put enough focus on process. Experience, if you want low cost, process is the key.
But you are also giving the opportunity for the incumbent banks to win, right? Because the reality so far is that even the challenger banks, the supposed digital banks, are finding it very difficult to also win market share. What do you say about that?
Well, banking has always been a long-term play, right? And I would advise anyone thinking about this that you need to think not in 3 years, you need to think kind of in a 5-year kind of time frame. Now, the problem is this, right? If someone makes it in your market in that 5-year time frame, right? If 1 or 2 players make it, they will have a business model that you cannot compete with because their costs are low, their experience is good, right? And if they have been doing that for a few years and they have that foothold, right? How are you going to dislodge them? And that's the key question that all the boards and the management need to think about. I can't stop them in 10 years' time, right? But I can do something about it now so that the gap in experience, the gap in cost is narrow. And if it's narrow, they have a much tougher time. So it's all about making it harder for them.
It's a long-term play. It turns out as well as a digital play.
Yes, and because it's a long-term play, it actually favors the incumbents. Of course, you need deep pockets, right? Anyone who doesn't have deep pockets is well-funded and knows how to spend that money wisely, right? Isn't going to make it as well. So it's a very interesting, combination of new and old, and both have their pluses and minuses.
And on that note, we go to a very interesting segment that we call This or That. And we are in this very interesting segment, a This or That segment, a Rorschach test of sorts to understand the mind, the heart, and the psyche of the leaders in financial services. Dr. Dennis Khoo, is it coffee or tea?
Tea.
Is it buy or build in the area of technology?
It's buy.
Is it starting work early or leaving work late?
It's neither. It's produce the outcome, work any hour you want.
Is that, are you a risk taker or are you risk averse?
I would say I'm a risk taker that explores the downside well.
This should be a foregone conclusion, cloud or on-prem?
You've got to be on the cloud. It doesn't mean you can't have both.
Is that human agents or chatbots?
It's both. And the design that TMRW has is the design to go with. So they started with chatbots with a high ratio of agents, and then as the chatbot improve, you can lower the number of agents. So having the chatbot at the center of everything is key, because the moment you put the chatbot at the side, it's not going to work.
The jack of all trades or master of one?
Jack of all trades.
Is that beach or mountain?
Tough one. I think mountain.
Is that fiction or nonfiction?
Well, non-fiction, naturally.
And we are naturally talking about writing, driving digital transformation. Dr. Dennis Khoo, what was the experience like?
In writing, driving digital transformation, right? I think the learnings curve was very steep. I mean, I'm a first-time author. And so one of the biggest things that you read the book so many times that actually you are sick of reading it. You almost think like, I couldn't read it again, because you've got to perfect it along the way, right? As you first have the idea, and initially I thought, as a first-time author, I might write it as a primer. But then as you get a publisher, you discuss the angles, your thinking changes. And so there's a lot of morphing along the way. And then working with the editors, getting feedback, people saying, well, this isn't clear, what you're really saying here. And there's so many revisions over and over again, and sharpening it continuously over time, right? But I'm really, happy with the output. I think I've managed to get it with a lot of help from a lot of people, and to be really sharp. And the way it's organized and the story it tells, I think I've gotten very good feedback from the early people who have seen it. And I hope, your readers can explore this for themselves.
And of course, you were going through this in phases and also by chapter, right? What was the most favorite chapter or content or piece that you liked the most, just in terms of the writing experience?
A great question. I mean, I tend to be a futurist of sorts. So writing chapter 2, which is the future of banking, is the thing that excites me most.
And were there lessons in the book that would have been useful to you, at least for Tomorrow by UOB? Are there things in the book that you also discovered as you were writing?
I think as I was writing it, the thinking became more refined. I began to think of, okay, how could we generalize this, right? How could we make this something that's applicable across many industries, right? And of course, when you are actually doing something for the first time, like I did, you may not be so methodical. There's actually method to the madness, there usually is. But then as you have time to sit back and reflect, then you think of, okay, but this was the actual method that was used, right? Even though it may not have been described that way, you may not have explained it that way, but that was all along the method in the madness. And that is the thing that really comes out in the book.
And I have a feeling that this won't be your last book, Dr. Dennis Khoo. And I look forward to the next book of great insights into the future of financial services.
Definitely working on something right now. And kind of the next thing is really a step-by-step guide, right, for any company that's undergoing digital transformation. It's been a pleasure to discuss with you the key aspects of the book. And I really look forward to a future conversation with you on my next publication.